there were Israelis who were rejoicing these deaths on the comments sections of news sites and also in Facebook posts, and they were doing it not with an anonymous name, but with their real names. They were totally unashamed to be publicly identified as rejoicing in the deaths of innocent kindergartners. And what we see today is the mainstreaming of the utter dehumanization of Palestinians, which is how you can have the Israeli government pursuing a starvation policy in Gaza, how you can have Israel bomb indiscriminately, to use the words of President Biden.
We are joined today by an American Jewish author and journalist, Nathan Thrall. Nathan, welcome to the show. Let me briefly introduce you. You worked as a former director of the Arab-Israeli project at the International Crisis Group in Jerusalem. You've recently written a book which has won the Pulitzer Prize for general non-fiction. The book is called A Day in the Life of Abed Salama, Anatomy of a Jerusalem Tragedy. You have been trying to promote the book over the last 8 or 9 months. The book came out before the October 7th attacks by Hamas in Israel. You probably had no idea how drastically the context might change when you were writing the book. I want to talk to you about the book. I'll be honest, I haven't read it because I'm not entirely sure it's available in Pakistan, but I'm very interested in hearing about the book. But can I start? So as a Jewish American in Israel, in Jerusalem right now, you probably come across as a lonely voice, given what is happening all around you. Can I just ask, do you feel safe? You live there with your family, with your 3 daughters, and yet you criticize Israeli policy there. Do you have concerns about your own safety?
I don't have concerns about my own safety, but that is because I do not write in the Hebrew language press. If I wrote in the Hebrew language press, it would be a different story, and there are journalists here. There's a prominent ultra-Orthodox journalist named Israel Fry, who has had mobs come to his house seeking to attack him merely for expressing grief for dead children in Gaza. So my safety is not at all in jeopardy, but it would be a different story if I were writing in Hebrew.
Okay, so you've previously talked about the Israeli occupation. You've been very clear that all this did not really start on October the 7th. There's a long history of systematic domination, the way Israel is expanding its settlements in the West Bank, and so on and so forth. Tell us a little bit about your book and what is the main plot. It is obviously non-fiction, so there are real people, real characters that you've spent time with and you're trying to tell the story.
Yes. So the genesis of the book really was a frustration with the way the world treats this conflict, as we see today with the war in Gaza. And what we see repeatedly is that there is an upsurge in violence. There's an Israeli attack on Gaza. There's an uprising in the West Bank. There's an Israeli incursion into a town like Jenin. And this makes the front pages of the newspapers, and the whole world calls for restoring calm. And what I wanted to address was this system, this status quo that is anything but calm for Palestinians. And until we address that system, we are doomed to see recurrence of violence over and over again. And so what I aimed to do with this book was to tell what has been described as a nonfiction novel, to tell a very human story about a tragedy that occurred here in Israel, Palestine in 2012. A bus full of kindergartners from the Jerusalem area was struck by a giant semi-trailer that was on its way to a settlement quarry. And this truck struck the bus flipped over, it caught fire, and a few bystanders heroically entered this bus and saved many of the children. Some of the children died, one of the teachers died. And what I aimed to do with this book was really through the eyes of the children, the parents, the teachers, the doctors, the founder of a nearby settlement, some of the Israeli emergency service personnel. All of these people, they live very, very segregated lives, the Jews and the Palestinians, from one another. But in this event, their lives came into violent collision. And through the story of this tragic accident, I try to tell the entire story of Israel-Palestine.
This book, it came out before October 7th. What has your experience been since then in what you had imagined in terms of promoting the book in the region and beyond?
Well, the book, its primary aim is to give you a very visceral sense of what it is to live in this place. My book was published on October 3rd. I was going on a 6-week book tour in the US and the UK with the title character Abed Salama, who lives just a couple miles away from me here in Jerusalem. He lives in the town of Anata. And we understood that our whole world had changed as a result of October 7th. His family's life changed immediately. The entire town that he lives in is surrounded by walls, and it is very easy for Israel to close it. It has 2 exits, and Israel closed both of them. And he became very concerned for his family. He had to cut the tour short. And we had many, many events that were canceled after October 7th because there were audiences that were interested in hearing about the lives of Palestinians living under Israeli rule after October 7th. They, at least the organizers of these events, were very fearful of holding the events. They felt that the audiences were not ready to hear anything that was sympathetic toward Palestinians.
I can totally imagine that. I've been to Jerusalem and I've traveled to Ramallah. I've seen the barriers and how long it takes, to cover such a short distance and the checkposts. So that is sort of understandable given where you are, how many of these events will be cancelled. What has your experience been in the US and Germany, trying to talk about your book, trying to talk about this whole mass murder from the deep understanding that you have?
So what we've seen is really 2 different effects on public opinion since October 7th. One is this younger generation has learned anew about Israel-Palestine, and they have been radicalized by what they've seen over the last 8 months, and they're mobilized in a way that they have never been mobilized before. On the other hand, an older generation, I think, has become even more pro-Israel and even more entrenched in their view that Israel has no choice but to control the Palestinians indefinitely. And unfortunately, it's the older generation that controls many of the leading cultural institutions, and they therefore canceled about 1/4 of the events that we had scheduled in the US and the UK. In the UK, even the police shut down one of our events in London. They were shutting down that week any event with Palestinian in the title. So it's not a clean picture. There are 2 different processes happening at the same time.
Okay, so having worked in London and Germany, I'm just baffled by how the definition of anti-Semitism has been redefined to shut down any protest and debate. Your events in Germany were also cancelled, right? I was watching some news that you had an event in Frankfurt. It was canceled.
Exactly. At the last minute. Yes, I had an event in Frankfurt that was canceled. Again, the same story. They were afraid of any kind of controversy, afraid of upsetting audience members, and they gave us no warning. It was just a few days before the event. It had been planned for weeks or months in advance, and that was canceled. Fortunately, we found another venue in Frankfurt at the very last minute that hosted us. But yes, this is due to years-long efforts by Israel and allied groups to define anti-Semitism in a way that prevents criticism of Israel. And more than 1,000 scholars of the Holocaust, of Jewish history, of Israeli history, have come forward and said that this definition is absolutely unacceptable. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It is about protecting Israel from entirely legitimate criticism. And they've put forward alternative definitions of anti-Semitism that do not prescribe the criticism of Israel.
So look, I mean, you've lived in the region and you are aware that there's been obviously a lot of hatred on both sides, right? As a Pakistani, I've tried to educate myself. I've been to synagogues, I've been to Auschwitz, I've tried to educate myself about the atrocities that Jewish people suffered during the Second World War in Germany and beyond. But I'm completely baffled by the amount of hatred I see in Israeli society today. Maybe because of social media or what. I mean, I'm not surprised by the hatred in politicians or in the military. I am absolutely shocked by the hatred in the Israeli society. I see on TikTok videos, on social media, mom and dad and kids rejoicing over dead bodies of Palestinians, ridiculing, cracking jokes, making memes. I really want to know, is this something new, or has it always been like this and we just didn't know?
So it's interesting that you mention this, because that theme of dehumanization is something that comes up in my book. Because when this bus accident occurred and several Palestinian children died in the bus, there were Israelis who were rejoicing these deaths on the comments sections of news sites and also in Facebook posts, and they were doing it not with an anonymous name, but with their real names. They were totally unashamed to be publicly identified as rejoicing in the deaths of innocent kindergartners. And this was so disturbing, actually, to an Israeli journalist that he decided to make a TV special about the people who were rejoicing over this accident, and he found them and interviewed them, and they were unabashed. They said, yes, I am entirely proud of what I wrote. And what he wanted to do with this TV special was to hold up a mirror to his own society and to ask, how did we get to a point where people feel comfortable in their own name publicly rejoicing in the deaths of kindergartners? Now, that is, of course, just one segment of Israeli society. There are segments of Israeli society that are horrified by that. But this segment has grown. It has grown. It is stronger than it's ever been. And this is a historical process. And what we see today is the mainstreaming of the utter dehumanization of Palestinians, which is how you can have the Israeli government pursuing a starvation policy in Gaza, how you can have Israel bomb indiscriminately, to use the words of President Biden, and to have more than 90% of Israelis in public opinion polls say that they think that Israel used the appropriate amount of force. And in more recent polls, many Israelis, huge numbers, saying actually Israel needed to use more force.
So whatever Netanyahu is doing, I mean, when we look at it from a distance, the explanation is that the longer the bloodbath continues, the longer he can stay in power. Before October 7th, he was facing a lot of opposition and criticism, but this whole mass murder has redefined his political career. But from what you were saying, the majority does back him, and they want him to actually go further.
Yes, the majority of Israeli society supports what the government has been doing toward Gaza since October 7th. And you see it even with the opposition figures like Yair Lapid, or these people who came into the government like Benny Gantz, they do not actually propose a different policy toward Gaza. They believe in continuing the war. They believe in refusing a permanent ceasefire until Hamas is so-called eradicated, which every Israeli security official is coming around to the view that that's an unachievable goal.
Now, President Biden has said repeatedly that he accepts that American bombs have been used to kill people in Gaza indiscriminately. Why has he been dragging his feet in cutting off the supply so far?
Well, President Biden is a very, very instinctively pro-Israel president. He has been for his entire political career prior to becoming president of the United States. And I think he is surrounded actually by senior members of his administration who would like him to be much tougher with Israel than he has been. But he has, I think, on a very gut personal level, very little sympathy for Palestinians and a lot of sympathy for Israel. And I think that is one of the greatest constraints actually on US policy right now. This is very damaging to US interests, and it is damaging to Biden personally. He stands to potentially lose this election over his support for Israel as it's committing war crimes in Gaza.
So this is what doesn't make sense. I mean, at the end of the day, every politician cares about his or her political fortunes. Is he so deeply wedded to the Israeli mindset that he would sacrifice his political career at this point in where he is?
I believe he calculates that he is between a rock and a hard place, that he is trying to navigate a narrow path. I think he believes, and I think many of his advisors also believe, that if he were to go too hard against Israel, that would be even more damaging than what he's doing at present. That to have the entire pro-Israel community in the United States, pro-Israel organizations, pro-Israel lobbying groups, pro-Israel members of his own party, to have all of those people angry with him over being what they perceive to be too hard on Israel would jeopardize his electoral chances. And so what he's trying to do is to be sufficiently pro-Israel for those people while still signaling to Arab American voters, to younger voters, to the more left members of the Democratic Party, that he's not just blindly pro-Israel, but that he is trying his best to end this war and to curb Israel's behavior to some degree. And the administration keeps claiming that they have been tough with Israel, that the operation in Rafah has been more limited than it otherwise would have been due to American pressure. So again, he's trying to have it both ways and to signal to both groups that he's doing what they want, but it's not entirely working. And the reason it's not working is the truth. The truth is he is standing 100% with Israel. And these signals that he's making that, oh, he's being tough, it's just words and it's really meaningless, and it's not fooling younger voters. It's not fooling left voters within his own party.
Okay, I mean, taking sort of the long-term view, I mean, obviously, first and foremost thing that most people around the world would like to see is a ceasefire, right? We don't know when that will happen. But every now and then we hear this discussion about, one-state solution and two-state solution. You've actually talked about that there may be neither. And Israel is actually looking to continue the status quo and consolidate its current policies. Is that the most likely scenario?
Absolutely, that's the most likely scenario. It would take a revolution to imagine a different outcome. What we have had for more than half a century is Israeli control, permanent, indefinite control of Palestinian lives, depriving Palestinians of basic civil rights, and the other steps of giving Palestinians either citizenship and equal rights, or giving them a sovereign state, as the PLO demands, on just 22% of their homeland. These are costly steps for Israel. To give Palestinians citizenship and equal rights means Israel would no longer be a Jewish state, which 90+% of Israelis are opposed to. And to give the Palestinians a sovereign state on 22% of their homeland would mean withdrawing hundreds of thousands of settlers and major political upheaval inside Israel. And in addition, many people just don't feel that it's in Israel's security interest to allow a sovereign state to emerge in this area. So those are perceived as very costly steps for Israel, and much less costly for Israel is to simply continue what it has been doing, to continue its control, to deepen its control, to expand its settlements, and to tighten the grip on Palestinian communities that are constricted into little enclaves like Gaza, like the town of Anata, where my book takes place.